Thank you. I hope everything she said about me was good, because I didn't understand much of it. It's a great pleasure and privilege to be here. I want to share with you some science of language and also science of how children learn languages, and also how it's going to tell us something about human nature. So, what makes a human? I mean, this is a question that has puzzled scientists and thinkers for a long time. Once upon a time, walking up straight was considered an early proposal, and so Plato came up with the definition that humans are featherless bipedals. Okay? But then immediately the great philosopher was presented with a featherless chicken, which is not a human being. And also, once upon a time, we thought complex social organization is a uniquely human trait. That turned out to be not the case either. As we now learn more about the animal world, we know that social organization, cooperation, and competition happens in other animals as well. And also, this is not too long ago, we thought humans are the only kind that do it just for fun, not only to pass down our genes. But that turned out to be not the case either. As we know that some of our primate relatives seem to be much more eager going at it than us. They do it more often, they do it with more partners, and even do it in families, particularly the bonobos. But there's still one more thing. Okay? I think there's one more thing that remains uniquely human, as a quote from Lewis Thomas that it's quoted just early on. And this is the only ability, maybe the last one, that's going to hold some sense of a false sense of superiority of us over other animals as the top of the food chain, so to speak. And this instinct of language has not been lost on famous thinkers such as Darwin. He said, man has an instinctive tendency to speak, as we see in the babble of young children, whilst no child has an instinctive tendency to bake, brew, or write. Language is something that gives us the ability to express our thoughts in infinite ways, and that's also the very fabric that holds human societies together. And it's also, I think, the reason that we can come to lecture and to hear about how language works. But also, Darwin also pointed out that language is not a true instinct. For language, every language has to be learned. So a boy born in New York is going to learn English, and born in Beijing is going to learn Chinese, and born in here is probably going to learn both, Spanish and Basque. So we have to answer the question, how do we learn those individual languages? How do we learn English? How do we learn Spanish, Chinese, or Basque? So we want to know how this instinct works with nurture, namely how nature works with nurture together to give this language. So let's see. And what we're going to do is to jump right to the very beginning of science of child language. That is actually to look at the very, very early stage of language learning. So in around the 1980s, there was a story going on in Paris, in maternity wards, in fact. It turned out that babies born to foreign language-speaking mothers got angry when their mothers started switching from the native language to the language of French when they talked to the nurses. So this was quite puzzling. So after all, those babies were born just a few minutes ago. How do we know so much about their language? So then a team of scientists went to the hospitals. Then they actually tested, and they found out that indeed, so for example, French babies could distinguish the sound of French from Russian at birth, immediately, minutes after birth. And you may say, well, this is not so puzzling, but this is what happens. They can also distinguish speech of Spanish from English, two languages they have no exposure to whatsoever, even in the first few minutes of their lives. So the logical conclusion is that some aspects of language must be learned before the child was born, namely in the womb. But I guess you don't have memories of what it sounds like in the womb, but if you sink your head into a tub and try to listen to people talk, that gives you a good approximation of what it sounds like. As we know, the womb is full of liquid. Liquid is not a very good medium for transmitting sound, and this is actually what it sounds like in the womb. So I'm going to play to you a very famous line from a movie, as heard by the fetus. . Is audio on? Sorry, the audio is not on. That's too bad. Oh, good. Oh, that's not good.
I'll be back.
Oh, you heard that, right? One time. Twice. Third time.
I'll be back.
Okay. So not a lot of sound actually gets transmitted through liquid. So the child actually doesn't hear the consonants or the vowels of the language. What he heard is what linguists call prosody. That is the basic rhythm of language, how the sentences are put together, the intonation, the pitch. And so they must be, because the sounds actually don't get carried through the liquid, so it must be the things that the rhythm of language that the infant or the fetus was paying attention to. And in fact, and we all have some intuition about what those properties are. So according to one of the kings of Spain, he said, at least according to legend, "To God I speak Spanish, to women Italian, to men French, and to a horse German." And he must be a linguist, because he's actually remarkably accurate. The three, I suppose, noble languages, Spanish and Italian and French, are indeed very similar in some aspects and very different from the language of German or English or Russian. That is, as you all know, in language like Spanish, the words are structured, the beat of the language is very regular, almost like a melody, which is probably not surprising that some of the greatest operas were written in Romance languages. And with all due respect to Mozart or Wagner, German just doesn't have that kind of regularity of speech where you'll see, if people have done analysis of this, in German, the beat of the language is far less regular. Some words are heavy because they are stressed. Some words are not heavy because they're light. You see a much more chaotic pattern. So this pattern appears to be what the baby or the infant or the fetus was paying attention to. And this would explain why a French newborn, being a fetus, heard only this beat of a language, was able to distinguish French from Russian, because the beats of the two languages are very, very different. Would also explain that those newborns could also distinguish the beat of Spanish from the beat of from the beat of English, neither of which is ever heard before, because the beat of Spanish is very similar to the beat of French, which is very different from the beat of English. One of the things we'll see is that babies are really prepared to learn a language right from the get-go. And even though the ability to follow the beat, it doesn't seem like a big deal, it's actually a very, very big deal. Because when a child is learning, a newborn is learning a language, is embedded in all kinds of noises out there. It could be telephone rings, could be that could be the dishwasher, could be their siblings screaming or crying. The child has to know what counts as a language. So what it's doing is quite simple. I've already learned the beat of the pattern out there. I'm simply going to follow the beat. But adults don't have that kind of luxury. In fact, adults are terrible at learning languages. And so here's a clip from a popular American movie, Lost in Translation, a few years ago. It's about stockings. And it may not be suitable for young children, but we're doing this in the name of science. So let's see. Audio, please.
Leave my stockings. Yes, please. Leave them.
What?
Leave them. Hey, leave my stocking.
Hey,
Hey.
lift them, what?
Leave them like this. Leave them.
Rip them?
Leave.
It's a little embarrassing. So it's almost as if for adults, we struggle so much to learn language. It's almost as if the language of the world were indeed scattered around at the Tower of Babel. But that's not the case for babies. So for example, Japanese adults, as shown in the movie, have famously or infamously have trouble with R and L sounds in English. Two sounds are often confused. Sometimes it's okay. Rice, lice, right, light. Now we're in an election year. That could be a sort of embarrassment. But Japanese newborns have no problem with this whatsoever. In fact, Japanese newborns, if you play the sound of R and L, they could easily distinguish these two sounds. And in fact, it's now known that infants are indeed universal listeners. You can play any sound, subtle differences across the language that adults will be completely hopeless about. You play those contrasts to infants, all newborns can tell them apart. And so during the process of language learning, it seems as if we're specialized to our particular language. And in fact, this process happened very, very early. It's even very surprisingly early. This happens when we're just 10 months of age. So here I'm going to, just to show you how much better babies are than us, we're going to show you two sounds that if you're a native speaker of Hindi, they'll sound very, very different to you. But for most of us, I think they sound identical. So let's try that. Audio, please.
Da, da.
Let's listen to that again.
Da, da.
I'm not playing a trick. I'm not playing the same file twice. It's indeed very different if you happen to be a Hindi speaker. For babies prior to 10 months of age, they could hear the difference. But babies after 10 months of age, they can no longer do this. Here, just to finish this up, I'm going to play two sound files from the language called Salish, which is a Native American language now spoken in Canada. Again, they sound identical to me. Again. Those are actually two different sounds. We just simply can't tell them apart. In fact, you can actually, a good deal can be said about language learning as an overall theme of how children learn languages is that use it or lose it. You only learn those that are preserved in your environment, even though you were born with all the possibilities of all the languages. Sorry. Just to make the point clear. So to appreciate how children learn languages, you actually not a bad idea to start with how just improbable language learning is, which is why I suppose language learning is referred to as the seventh wonder of the world.